Alright guys, let's talk about learning the bow drill and stacking the deck in your favor. Alright, first off guys, my neighbors are target shooting, so I apologize for the gunfire in the background. Hopefully you can hear me just fine. But anyway, on with the subject at hand. It is no secret that I'm a friction fire bug. I love to do it. For lots of reasons, I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to try to make this as short as possible, but I'm going to go ahead and apologize. A lot of this is going to be talking. The purpose of this video is there are a lot of great tutorials that show you step by step how to create a bow drill set and how to effectively use it. But I've seen lots of my friends and lots of folks, I have no idea who they are, struggle to actually put all those pieces of the puzzle together and have success. Now I'm self-taught, which I mean, I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. I have not had the pleasure of receiving instruction face-to-face or live with someone to teach me how to do the bow drill. And so that being said, I've learned from a lot of failures, a lot of mistakes, and just I've had to kind of piece together what works for me. So that being said, you know, I've said it before, there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat, and likely most of them work. So what I share today is not a standard. It is just the way I figured out that I think might help some folks out there who are struggling to put the pieces of the puzzle together and find success. That if to help them kind of slow down and find success piece by piece by piece, and then at the end kind of pull everything back together and then have success. So what do I mean by stacking the deck in your favor? Well, simply, I mean give yourself prime conditions to learn what is, in my opinion, the most important key part of having success with a bow drill. And quite frankly, it's something that's not talked about a whole lot on a lot of the tutorials that I've seen. So what is that? That is form. You know, I've heard people say that before when I was really struggling trying to put things together and get it to work. You know, I'd hear people say, you know, form is the most important part. Form is key. And you know, I'd look around and I'd see a little talk here, a little talk there, and they would go over every specific part of the form that works for them, but wouldn't necessarily flesh it out into the whys. And you and I both know, guys, that you know, watching a YouTube video is drastically different than having someone there critiquing exactly what you're doing. Say, okay, you need to do it a little bit different this way, or a little bit different that way. You know, speed up here, more pressure there. You know, that sort of thing. So what I've kind of put together here is something that helps you in that journey of learning to figure out for yourself and see why it works at each different stage. The bow drill is something that there's a lot of different little pieces, a lot of different little nuances going on at once. I mean, you have different areas of your body doing different things, you know, all at once that you have to concentrate on. So that being said, form is key. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but right now let's talk about equipment list. This is going to kind of answer some questions that I've received. Number one, I've had a few guys come to me and say, I don't have a good bushcraft knife. I think that's where I'm failing. Well, quite frankly, any knife will work. I've used probably 2 or 3 dozen different knives to create a bow drill set. It's just, again, it's not the beauty of the set. More so, the quality of wood does play a big difference, or is a big key factor. The beauty or aesthetics of a set is not what defines success. So in any knife will work. As long as it's pointy on the end and it's sharp enough to cut, you can get the job done. That being said, the best friction fire knife I have ever used, hands down, is a $9 knife you can get off of Amazon. In fact, this sheath would cost more than the knife itself. This is a more of 510 or 511, I believe. They are super cheap on Amazon. If you want to put the money into it, this is probably the best one you're going to find, specifically for friction fire. In my opinion, I mean, opinions vary. I'm not saying this is, my opinion doesn't rule or anything. This is just my personal opinion. If you want to put the money into a knife specifically for friction fire, I suggest you go this route. But that being said, you could probably get it done with a steak knife. So, beyond the knife, I want to suggest a saw of some kind, Laplander, multi-tool saw. You could even get the job done with a bow saw or buck saw. Something to make your life easier to cut through the wood. No big deal. So the first real area I suggest you stack the deck in your favor for success is to go to a lumberyard, Lowe's, Home Depot, whatever is in your area, and get not necessarily cedar, but this is a 1 inch by 2 inch, I believe, stick of cedar. They market this for molding, I believe, in the house. The reason I suggest this, it's an easy size to work with. It's already basically in the shape for a hearth board. Um, it makes a little bit of a small spindle, but that doesn't really matter when you're learning that much. For a split spindle, you'll just split it in half and round it out. But because it's gone through a lumber yard and it's been in a controlled environment for who knows how many months, it's almost guaranteed to be dry. So you don't have to worry about the moisture level as you would in a tree that you would harvest out in nature. Secondly, in stacking the deck in your favor. This one is a big debate with a lot of guys. Talking about the bow. For learning purposes and also for general use purposes, I greatly prefer a curved bow, and I'll get into more reasons why here shortly. But for the main reason, that your cordage doesn't stay the same length. It always stretches. No matter what you use, it's gonna stretch. This is bankline right here. This is my favorite. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But because it's curved, I like to hold. This is where my handhold is. It's not back here behind the cordage, it's right here. So as you're going and your cordage starts to stretch and starts to slip on the spindle, you can control how much pressure or how tight the line is on your spindle. So you don't have to constantly stop and adjust, or that way you don't have to worry about getting the perfect tension every time you tie it on there. You can get it a little bit loose and you can still know that you can pull it in and apply the pressure to that spindle that needs to be there. A lot of folks prefer a straight bow or stick, whatnot, to drive the spindle. If it works for them, that's great. This is just what I prefer. So obviously that's what I'm going to suggest to you guys if you're having trouble learning it and following along here. Let's go ahead while I have the bow in hand. You're going to need cordage. As far as the equipment list goes, you're going to need cordage. Two main ones out there that I'm aware of are bankline and paracord. Always know that no matter what kind of cordage you use, it is a consumable. You will wear it out over a period of time. I prefer bankline for two reasons. Number one, it lasts longer, considerably longer than paracord. And two, because it's tarred, it's grippier. It grips the spindle. In fact, a lot of times, especially when the stuff is fresh, you'll see, in fact, you can see a little bit here, how when it's real tight, it leaves a little bit of tar on the spindle. Anyway, paracord, I don't have it handy to show you, but the outside casing, as the friction with the spindle, as it's turning the spindle, the outside casing or sleeve of the paracord, it starts to fray. And once that starts to happen, it doesn't take long for it to wear through, and then it's just you have a ball of fuzz around your spindle. The last way I'm going to suggest as far as equipment goes to stack the deck in your favor is I highly suggest you get some sort of low friction or friction-free bearing block. This is the one I use a lot. This one's not friction-free. This is an antler. It's a piece of antler tine I got and eventually wore through. It was getting so deep that I could actually feel the heat on the other side. So what I did is I snipped off a thimble and epoxied that in there. Now I say this one's not friction free because it's not. I don't know if you can see, but there's a manufacturer's stamp on the inside of the thimble, and it provides a little bit of resistance or a little bit of friction, which in my opinion, for someone, or once you find success with a bow drill, I think it's a really good compromise between a wood bearing block and a man-made low friction bearing block, simply because with a wood bearing block you can actually achieve the same amount of low friction as you can with this antler bearing block with a thimble in it. With pine, my main go-to for lubrication is pine resin. When you first start going with pine resin, it is essentially friction free. Now, I mean, you can use oil from your skin, you can use plant material, green plant material, stuff like that, and it will lower the resistance or the friction quite a bit. You guys already all know that, so I'm not going to get into it too much. Now, another one that I would suggest, this one is absolutely friction free. This is just a piece of pecan, I believe, with a skateboard bearing epoxied in it. Actually, it's not epoxied yet. It's the oil is drying on it. I just shoved it in there. So, but I mean, it'd still work, epoxy or not. Now, if you were like me and you were stuck that you were dead set, you want to use a natural bearing block. I don't blame you at all. So here's a couple suggestions. Number one, this is just a knob of pine bark I pulled off on the way out here that I've drilled a slight divot into, and it actually fits your hand pretty good. Now this one's not friction free, but it is pretty close. Now, but it is highly consumable. I mean, you'll probably use this up in, I don't know, two or three bow drill coals. Or if you're having to bow for a really long time, you may burn right through it. I don't know, but it works pretty good in a pinch. I've done it before. It works great. Now, nature's absolute friction free, and this works great. The only downside is your hands get kind of sticky. This is a piece of fat wood that I harvested 10 feet behind the camera right before I started filming this. I drilled a little divot in it with my knife, and you can see the resin in there. And this is friction free because, number one, fat wood is extremely hard, but at the same time it is full of resin. Now as that spindle spins in there, both the spindle and the bearing block are going to heat up. And when that happens, that resin is going to start coming out or sweating out of the bearing block and lubricating your spindle. Now the sweat from your hands is going to mix with it too, and your hands are going to get sticky. Like I said, that's the downside to it. But that is as close to friction free as you're going to get without using a rock or a clamshell or something like that. If you can't find a big piece of fat wood, get a smaller sliver, put it underneath another piece of wood. It's simple as that. Now bamboo works great as a shell or a hold for this stuff because it's cupped. You just put it in there, it can't go anywhere as it wants to twist to the side, whereas something like this you'd have to kind of pinch it with your fingers until you get going. Alright guys, enough yakking. Let's get to work. Alright guys, my first suggestion of ways you can stack the deck in your favor that doesn't involve gear and stuff like that is, simply put, don't come out here to the woods to do this. Do it on your patio, do it on your deck, someplace that is dry, someplace that is flat. Flat because you'll see in a second that it does, being on a flat level surface does affect your form. So do that first. If you do want to come out here to the woods to do this, I highly suggest you find a place as flat as possible and as dry as possible with as little saplings and leaves and stuff around to snag up in your bow or whatnot. Form does kind of test your balance a little bit, so that's why it needs to be flat. Also, if it's lumpy, you're going to have a hard time keeping your hearth board from scooting any which direction on you. Alright guys, I'm not going to concentrate on creating the set too terribly much. I'm going to do a quick run through. I realize there's been a lot of talking. I appreciate you guys hanging on this long. Hopefully this can help you out. Alright, your spindle, you're going to want it approximately 10 to 12 inches long. Here's why. Say my hearth board's right here. You want it up high enough that is below your center of gravity on your hand, your whatever hand you're using on the bearing block, that you can effectively push down on it. But you don't want it so short that you're leaning forward and it gets awkward. Short ones do work, but it takes some practice, I think, in my opinion. So, that being said, let's create our spindle. Now baton it a bit wider than what you think because you're going to be removing material. Now, just one thing to keep in mind, the smaller this tip is, the less friction you're going to start out with, whatever bearing block you're using aside from the skateboard bearing. Now, the actual working end of this thing. This is where stacking, the real part of stacking the deck in your favor starts. Because I suggest, until you feel comfortable with the form, don't even bother going for a coal. Because the goal behind this is to learn the form. You want to get this end as round as possible. Now, what you want to do is whittle this thing down to a point. if you're using cedar, it tends to be pretty soft. So as you get finer into it, start going slower and taking less material. Have a point. Now, probably a lot of you guys are going, what? I thought it was supposed to be round so it fit in the divot. Well, you know, it is. But the thing is, a lot of the form issues that I've seen is with a round spindle and a round divot. There is a little grab at the bottom of the spindle to actually keep it in place. Because it's a smooth round surface, or smooth-ish round surface, it's pretty easy for it to fly on out. Now if your form is spot on, or even close, it's going to be locked into place. But because you got a point on here, and in a second we're going to have a matching, you know, hollowed out point in here, it's locked in there even if you haven't figured your form out yet. So let's go ahead. And for this, I'm going to suggest using the middle of this. Typically, you'd want to kind of cater off to one side. But like I said, we're not going for a coal right now. Alright guys, I will do this from two angles, but I will explain more so on this one probably. As far as form goes, now I'm right-handed, so my non-dominant leg is going to go forward first. It's just the way it's comfortable to me. You want your legs in a straight a line as possible. That's where balance comes in. That's why it needs to be level ground. If it's, you know, a hill one direction or the other, or uneven, achieving a straight line with your legs is going to be more difficult. So when you step on here, you want your dominant leg to be almost, I mean, if you did it like this, it would be almost impossible to stay in line. But you want your right knee or your left knee, depending on how you're set up, to be as close, tucked in behind your heel here as possible. It's because you want your bow to run in a parallel, as much parallel as possible as you can with your legs. Now the reason being, and everybody who's watched a bow drill tutorial before has heard this, the key to form, and it is true, is your bearing block wrist. I'm going to go ahead and take this off because you want to lock it right here. Now, why is it important to go straight this way? Because in locking your wrist to your shin right here, and you'll see better when I move the camera around here. So if you're locked in this direction and you're using your arm to pull up against your shin to lock it in, when you're pushing or pulling the bow, it's going with or against that force, which makes it much easier for your hand to control the bearing block and the spindle and keep it from popping out. If you go this direction, because you're pulling this direction, there's going to be some wiggle room this way. It's kind of like in, I don't know, kind of compare it to self-defense class, or, you know, martial arts or something. If your attacker is pushing you one direction, don't push back because you're pushing against or with them. Push to the side and you'll throw them off balance because they're not exerting any force in that direction. Alright, so again, just as an example, step it on your hearthboard. There's your divot. You got your spindle. It is just below the center of gravity of my hand here. There, now my arm's locked in. So again, just to kind of show, if I'm in correct form and bowing, the force of the bow is pushing the spindle this way and that way. But because I'm pulling back up against my shin to lock it in, if I were to push that way, there's wiggle room. If I were to push that way, there's wiggle room. So if you're bowing this way, or even at an angle, it's easier for the spindle to fly out. Alright guys, one other thing about this that I couldn't show you facing the camera is with a spindle this length, just short enough that you push down on it and not having to kind of pull down on it a little bit. See how my leg is, or the upper part of my leg is further forward than the center of my foot, kind of like it's leaning forward? That is good because when your wrist is locked into your shin like this and you need more pressure, you don't have to burn out your upper body to do it. You can just lean forward a little bit and the pressure from your shin on top of your wrist will will put the weight of your body down into that spindle. Alright guys, well this is where all the pieces of this come together. Like I said, we put the divot in the center here because we're not going to go for a coal right now. What we want to do is we want to bow and bow and bow and bow and bow. We want to get used to the balance it takes. We want to get used to pushing on the bearing block and the spindle. We want to get used to bowing. We want to get used to all these pieces of the puzzle together and start creating a muscle memory. So just a little bit of demonstration. And lean forward, kind of scooch you up and lean forward. Now, one other thing I failed to mention before. You're going to have more control over the spindle staying in place the closer your bowstring is to the top of your foot. So when you first start off, short strokes and kind of push down until you get to where you're in a comfortable spot. And just go slow, the full length of the bow. There's no rush. You're not going anywhere. Just bow until your body remembers. So you don't have to think about, I need to switch my balance back here, or I need to push harder up there, or I need to bow straighter, or I need to push harder on the bearing block. And because we mirrored that divot to the point of the spindle, it's naturally wanting to stay in place. That is one thing you don't really have to concentrate on. And just keep on going. Create that muscle memory. Remember, just go slow. You're plenty burned in now. Look at the smoke. Enjoy the smell. Create that muscle memory. Alright guys, now again from the side. Now again, you want to use the ball of your foot right on top of the hearth board and get it as close to the divot as possible. Put it into place. Remember, nice relaxed pace. Short strokes to get the bowstring where you want it. If your string's getting kind of loose, just squeeze down with your hand to provide more tension on the spindle. If you need more pressure, just lean forward. Nice relaxed pace. And guys, as you can see, we burned halfway, 3/4 of the way through there. And I suggest you repeat that process as many times until you feel comfortable. Alright, just for demonstration purposes, let's do this real quick, start to finish. So you can see I've cleaned up the end of the spindle. I cut off the old divot, created a new one. Let's get going. Burn it in, just get comfortable. The bowstring down right above your foot. Long, steady strokes. Not a race. Just find the pressure that works for you. I'd say this is medium to light. Alright, we're burned in. Let's save that dust because you worked for it. I just knocked it off onto this leaf. You worked for the dust, you might as well keep it. Now at this point, instead of using a saw, I would highly suggest using a knife for this to cut out your notch. It's slower, more work, but it's more precise. Mark. In fact, let's do it this way. That way you can see the dust form. Mark about where you want it. Lots of people suggest different sizes and styles of notches. I'm just going to do what I do, which is about 1/2 to 3/4 inch on this end, taper down to somewhere between 1/4 and 1/8 inch, almost to the center. Once you made your lines on the side, that's kind of a guide. Bring it over to here. Just start whittling it out. Go for gold, guys. Push your dust you already worked for down into that notch. Get comfortable. Get your bowstring right above your foot. Slow and steady wins the race. Full length bow strokes. Let that dust build. Don't go crazy. Don't burn yourself out. Watch that dust form when it really starts puking out there. That's what you want. Speed up. Press down a little bit. Speed up. Now, lightly let go. From this point, you got about all the time in the world. Tap it to knock it out of there. There you go, guys. Alright guys, well I appreciate you hanging with me for so long. Just in conclusion, I highly suggest you go check out Dave Canterbury's or the Pathfinder School's tutorials. He's got 2 video series that are excellent on being successful with the bow drill. Justin Wolf or Grauer Wolf has got a couple that are great. Larry Roberts has got a couple that are great. And there are hundreds more probably on YouTube and various other places online that are good and that all have helped me get to where I am right now in my skill level with the bow drill, which I mean I'm not saying it's that great or anything. This video is strictly about how to take all the pieces, all the individual pieces of the puzzle and find success in each individual one, and then how to put all of those together to find success in the end. Simply put, in my self-taught journey, so to speak, basically I'm answering the questions that I had today, or I'm answering the questions in my learning process, the questions that I have or had and the failures that I had. I'm kind of answering those to hopefully just throw that out there, and hopefully some guys that are having trouble can use my mistakes and the tips and tricks that I've learned along the way to find success themselves. But again, thanks for sticking with me, guys. I hope you find it helpful. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.